So we're very excited to have Emily Bryson, a very unusual person researching pet food. Emily's an environmental science PhD candidate and a public health researcher. And even though she's based at Central Queensland Uni, she lives in Adelaide. And Emily's going to be sharing some information about her current work. Emily wants to help people, help dogs, help our environment, and that's through composting. So Emily's research or PhD topic is investigating how home composting can reduce plastic and pathogen pollution, and that's of dog feces. So that's in the environment, and also she's interested in whether the end product of all of that is going to be useful on edible gardens. That's the big question that no one has ever tackled. So Emily, over to you, and tell us what you've been up to, and I'm hoping you'll be able to share your screen.
I should be able to if you stop sharing yours. Yep.
Great.
Okay. And we'll go play from start. Okay, awesome. So yeah, look, thank you to the EnviroPet Waste Network for inviting me to talk about my research today about keeping poop in the loop. And as Ruth mentioned, yes, my really big question here is, can we actually safely compost dog feces at home and use that product in our backyard food gardens? I think that there is a potential to transform dog waste into a usable resource through composting and finding out if this is going to be a safe method. I would also like to acknowledge that I'm presenting from the traditional lands of the Kaurna people in Adelaide, South Australia. So today, I'm just going to give a brief overview of my project, my PhD research, and some of the initial key findings. I'll also talk about how this research can be used to help dog owners manage their dog's poo more sustainably. I know you've got a lot of questions. I do too. So I'll try and make sure that, that there's time for some questions at the end. All right. Now, we know that dog poo is a massive source of pollution. Here in Australia, we've got over 5 million dogs living with us. Very few of us ever really think about what the environmental effect of all of this pollution is in the environment. We have been recommended by councils to collect dog poo in a wrapped container and put it in a bin, and that is what's traditionally been known as responsible dog waste disposal. However, as we can see here, that actually uses a whole lot of plastic bags, and this is adding up. So we're not only putting single-use plastics, which are largely made out of fossil fuels, back into landfill. We're also discarding this organic waste within the dog poo itself into landfill. And that is actually contributing to greenhouse gases. So the alternative is to not pick it up. And that's not any better, because we know that dog poo does contain pathogens which can be passed through the soil and into the waterways that can pollute these ecosystems and actually end up harming human and other animal health. But there's also nutrients within the dog poo, like nitrogen, phosphorus, that can get into waterways and really wreak havoc on ecosystems as well. Look, we know that this is an issue, and all of you, I think, are keen on this as well. We don't really know what the solutions are yet. But what if we could actually take dog poo and realize it as a resource? What if we could transform it into something that's usable? So we know that that plastic is an issue worldwide, and that there are some alternatives with compostable and bioplastic alternatives. So dog waste bags are one of those things. It's not quite as easy as just making a switch from traditional plastic bags to compostable bags, particularly if the compostable bags doesn't end up in a compost setting. So if you're using a compostable bag and you're just putting it into landfill, you're not keeping poop in the loop. You're not actually participating in that circular economy. It's just a different type of product. Home compost is a potential solution here. Now, in Australia, we don't have as many industrial compost facilities as we need to really look after all the organic waste, including dog poo, in all of our communities. And given the types of populations in areas like in rural and remote Australia, the likelihood of having an industrial facility that can help with that are pretty slim. So home compost really should be considered as a good solution or a potential solution for people to use to not only more responsibly dispose of their dog feces, but also be able to treat it in a way that we can use it. And ideally, we can hopefully use it to grow food. A lot of people compost garden waste and food scraps for the end product of putting it on their home gardens. We've typically been told not to do that, and there's no real evidence to say why. And so that's one of the things that I'm looking at. Here is a brief overview of composting and how it works. So when we're talking about home compost, it's really kind of difficult to get a good balance of ingredients and to get a good product. Compost in general depends on a good balance of moisture, temperature, the particle size, pH. There's a lot of biological and chemical processes that go along with composting. In those industrial facilities, they are really highly controlled. So they can blend the mixtures of their feedstocks and their ingredients in the ratio that's ideal, and they can monitor temperature and heat. They can actually get really, really hot temperatures. So what we see here is when you put stuff together, you have the initial phase, the heat rises, you have this time period where human pathogens and plant pathogens are disinfected, and then you've got the time where the compost cools off and it matures. So this 55 degrees right here, Celsius, this is the point in industrial composting where the guidelines say we need to reach that temperature for at least 3 days in order to make sure that compost is sanitized enough to be used in edible gardens. It's a lot easier on a larger scale to do this. We really don't know how home composting can achieve this. It's generally thought that it can't because home compost methods are much smaller and that we actually can't achieve that sort of volume to get to these hot temperatures. However, there's a lot more to it than just heat. And we're still learning about the different types of chemical and biological processes that can lead to sanitation, even though the temperatures may not get up to that 55 degrees for the 3 days. So home compost is a lot more variable than what you're going to find in industrial facilities. We have smaller bins. Sometimes they're in ground or partially in ground. There's worm composting called vermicomposting. So there's a lot of considerations when we talk about home composting in a way that there isn't with industrial. So we actually don't know a whole lot about home composting of dog feces. The industry has responded because we know that a lot more dog owners are looking for more ecological alternatives to deal with their dog feces. So there are products out there that have been made specifically to help people compost their dog poo at home. Some of them are partially in ground, some of them are fully in ground that might use worms. Some of them are in ground that use a type of inoculant called effective microorganisms that's meant to help accelerate the process. And some of these are DIY methods that are available on the internet for people to give it a go. The important thing to note here is that compost is a treatment. It is a controlled way of the decomposition of organic waste. So just putting dog poo in the ground without having some sort of mixture of other ingredients or some way to accelerate that breakdown is not necessarily considered composting. So in order for it to be compost, you actually need to have this controlled breakdown through microbial action. So my research is comprised of a series of studies, and what I did was I surveyed Australian dog owners to find out what they are doing about dog disposal at home and away from home, but really focusing on the home disposal practices. So I did a survey about a couple of years ago across all of Australia, asking people, yeah, what do you do with your dog poo? And what do you use to pick it up? And where do you put it? And if you compost it, how are you composting it? And where do you put that compost? And I got an amazing response. And that actually really helped me to design these pilot scale composting trials. So I was able to mimic the types of compost methods actual dog owners are using and see in a controlled trial what happens. I got a really good response, which I'll talk a little bit more about. So from the pilot scale trials, I was able to get a lot more information about how to scale it up to something that's going to be much more representative of what people do in their backyards. And that's the trial I'm working on now, is my field scale. So I'm co-composting dog poo with food waste. And the findings of all these studies are hopefully going to come together into a type of risk assessment. And that will help to give some evidence-based guidance to dog owners and communities on what the actual risks are of home composting dog poo and where we might be actually able to use it safely. So some of the results from the survey are here. I got over 1,000 participants, which is amazing. And what was actually really good is that it was a wonderful spread across all states and both urban and rural and regional areas. So it was a really good representation of your typical Australian dog owner. It did validate my assumption that there's a lot of plastic and dog poo going to landfill. The other thing I noted was that a lot of dogs are pooing at home as opposed to away from home on walks. So home compost is one of those methods we need to be really looking at, not just looking at composting within dog parks, which is also important. But if a lot more dog poo is falling on the ground within the home, this is an area we really need to focus on. Most of the dogs from the participants, they said that they had been given worming tablets regularly. So these are well looked after, healthy dogs that are getting regular worming treatments. And that is important when we start to look at the types of concerns around pathogens. There is a lot of uncertainty about composting in general, home composting, that participants had. One of the questions that came up several times was they're unclear about how these worming medications might impact compost earthworms. Worm farming is one of the methods that people are using to try to deal with their dog poo, and so they didn't know if the drug is actually going to kill the worms because it's a worm, like, is it going to work the same? So that was a concern. There were actually a few people who are already composting their dog feces at home using some of the methods that I showed in the other slide, and they had mixed results. So some of them are purchasing those products or doing the DIY setup. Some of them have had great results. Others have tried and quit. A lot of people have looked for troubleshooting guidance online and through councils and haven't found the information that they're looking for. So with those that are composting, it was about 1 in 5 respondents are doing it now or have done it. About 1 in 5 respondents just weren't interested in composting dog poo at all. But over half of the respondents said that they were willing to compost dog poo at home with more credible guidance. So they're really looking for some research. They're looking for some evidence-based guidance on how to do it right. As suspected, there's a tendency for people to be reluctant to use dog poo compost on their edibles. Now, any Google search that you do, you're going to find guidance from people who are saying don't use these products, don't use dog poo compost on edibles. And the product makers, they do tend to make claims on the boxes and on their websites. Some of them will make claims about killing pathogens. Others, more often than not, advise dog owners to not use this compost system anywhere near edibles. The fact is, we don't know. We just don't know because these claims haven't actually been backed up by any actual scientific research, which is where I come in. The main takeaway here is that owners really do want to know how to compost their dog feces properly to mitigate the potential health risk of pathogens. So using the data that I got from the survey, I was able to set up some compost trials, and this was a pretty small scale. So these are 25-liter water carboys that I modified to be compost vessels. What I have here is, this is my setup. I ran 2 pilot trials using this method, and essentially it was just dog feces and sawdust as your carbon bulking agent, some commercial compost as an inoculant, and I put in certified compostable bioplastic bags to see how they break down as well. So there were a couple of variables here. So I used an alternate day turning method. I put worms into 2 of the replicates, and I also used the Bokashi style effective microorganisms as another variable to see which of the methods that Australian dog owners are using, which of these are going to be most effective, both for reducing pathogens and also for breaking down these bioplastic bags. The pathogens that I'm looking at specifically are E. coli. The bacteria are E. coli, Salmonella, and Campylobacter. These are bacteria that we know are present in dog guts and can be spread through food to humans. Same thing with the parasite eggs, that these are essentially zoonotic pathogens. So we know they're in dog food, poo, we know they can be passed through food, and we know that they can infect humans. The compostable bioplastic bags, this is just an example of how they started off in the compost bins and how they've broken down over time. Essentially, what you want to be seeing here is that 90% of these bags have broken down, have essentially disintegrated into particles that are less than 2 millimeters square. So we don't want big chunks in them, according to the Australian standard for home compostable bioplastics. I did a worm trial during COVID when I couldn't get into the lab. So what I was able to do here was use my own dog's poo. So I gave him his regular worming tablets, and I fed some test worms his poo at 6-day intervals to see if the drug residue in his antiparasitic tablet would have an effect on compost worms. What I found was pretty interesting. So I didn't actually find a significant effect of the drug. However, I did have worms that had not been treated, so control worms that were actually dying. So when people are getting advice that you either can't use treated dog poo in compost worm farms, or that you need to wait a period of time, my research didn't actually back that up. What I found is that the health of the worms and the condition of the worms is probably a factor that we need to look into more. So my current trial right now is the field scale composting trial. As I mentioned, I've actually scaled up from the 25 liters to 140 liters. So it's a much bigger size. It's much more representative of what most people are doing within their household. I am mixing in food waste, having some pretty good results with that. And in this one, the other difference is that I'm testing 3 bins that have the bioplastic bags in them and 3 bins that don't, so that in this trial, I'll be able to look and see if the quality of the compost is any different. So with the pathogens and the plastic, I am comparing these to known standards. So the pathogens I'm having tested as per Australian standard for compost, and I'm testing my own bioplastics as per the standards for bioplastic films, compostable bioplastic films, so that we actually have a comparison. And just to be certain, the compost standards are for industrial compost. So that way we can see whether or not the results from my trials can be compared to what you expect from commercial compost. So what I hope to achieve through this research is to be able to show what the effectiveness is of home compost methods that people are already using to reduce pathogens and break down those bioplastic bags. And also to be able to provide some evidence-based advice for home composting and using dog feces within a household. And that would be your edibles. The work that I'm doing, it is pretty novel. So I'm hoping that the methods that I've come up with will be adaptable for future researchers. And when I graduate, which I'm hoping to submit my thesis within a year, and when I do finish, my goal is to work with communities and local councils and other dog-related organizations and really help them deal with this waste responsibly and actually keep poop in the loop and be able to use it well. So where can you find my work? Well, I will be publishing papers from my thesis, and the best way to find them and the thesis when it is finished is through my university's repository for research. So this is the link, and just Google my name and it'll be up there when it happens. So other ways you can find me or follow me are on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and you can also shoot me an email.